The first rays of sunlight spilled across the endless pine forests of Yellowstone National Park, painting the rugged mountains in shades of gold and amber. Morning mist drifted through the valleys, and the crisp mountain air carried the scent of wet earth after the previous night's storm. For Ranger Daniel Brooks, mornings like this were the reason he had never left Yellowstone. At 40 years old, Daniel had spent nearly 2 decades protecting the park's wilderness. Every trail, river, and rocky ridge held memories of rescues, wildlife encounters, and countless patrols. Beside him sat his trusted partner, Max. The 6-year-old German Shepherd rested calmly in the passenger seat of the green National Park Service pickup truck. His glossy black and tan coat shimmered under the morning sun, while his intelligent amber eyes constantly scanned the forest outside the window. Today's assignment seemed simple. Inspect the northern Eagle Ridge area after the powerful thunderstorm that had swept through the park overnight. Daniel smiled as he glanced at Max. "If we're lucky," he said, "we'll only be clearing a few fallen branches today." Max gave a small wag of his tail but never looked away from the sky outside. Nearly 30 minutes later, the truck climbed a winding road that hugged the edge of a rocky cliff. Without warning, bang! A heavy impact shook the roof of the truck. Daniel instinctively hit the brakes. What was that? Before he could react, a massive bald eagle swept across the windshield. Its enormous wings cast a moving shadow over the truck. The eagle circled once, then dove again. Its sharp talons scraped loudly across the hood. Screech! Metal squealed beneath the claws. Daniel frowned. That's strange. He stepped out of the truck and looked around. The eagle landed on the branch of a tall pine tree about 50 yards away. It stared directly at him. Its golden eyes never blinked. Yet something felt unusual. The bird didn't fly away. It simply watched. Daniel inspected the truck. Only a few scratches marked the paint, nothing serious. It must be defending its territory, he muttered. Bald eagles occasionally became aggressive during nesting season. He climbed back into the driver's seat. The moment the truck began moving again, the eagle attacked once more. This time it swooped directly in front of the windshield. Daniel quickly slowed the truck. Easy. We're leaving. He decided to take another forest road farther away from the cliff. Normally that would solve the problem. 5 minutes later, the eagle returned. It flew beside the truck before diving once again, then again, and again. Not once did it actually strike Daniel. Instead, it always flew just close enough to force him to notice. Daniel had spent years working around wildlife. He had encountered grizzly bears, wolves, mountain lions, and countless birds of prey. But he had never seen behavior quite like this. He pulled over for the second time. The eagle landed on a large boulder ahead of the truck. Oddly enough, it wasn't looking at Daniel. It was staring at Max. The German Shepherd remained perfectly calm. No barking, no growling, no signs of aggression. He simply watched the eagle with complete focus. Daniel opened the passenger door. "Come on, Max." The dog jumped onto the ground. Instead of charging toward the eagle, Max lowered his nose and sniffed the earth for several seconds. Then he slowly raised his head, following the direction in which the eagle had flown. The bird suddenly lifted into the air. But this time, it didn't dive. It flew only a short distance before landing again. Then it turned around, waiting. Max immediately started walking toward it. "Hold on," Daniel called. Max stopped. He looked back at Daniel, then looked at the eagle again. Daniel knew that expression. He had seen it countless times during search and rescue missions. Whenever Max looked like that, he had found something important. "You want me to follow it?" Max's tail gave a slow wag. The eagle launched into the air again. It flew another 100 feet before landing on another rock. Once again, it looked back. It wasn't spreading its wings to threaten them. It wasn't screaming in anger. It wasn't trying to chase them away. It was waiting. A strange feeling settled over Daniel. If the eagle simply wanted to defend its nest, it would have driven them away already. Instead, it kept returning. It kept watching Max. It kept flying only a short distance ahead before stopping. Almost. As if it wanted them to follow. Daniel picked up his radio. "Ranger Brooks to headquarters. I'm going to investigate an area north of Eagle Ridge. After reporting his location, he clipped the radio back onto his belt. Then he looked at Max. If your instincts are right again, let's find out what that eagle is trying to tell us. Max immediately started forward. High above them, the bald eagle spread its magnificent wings and soared toward the distant cliffs deep inside Yellowstone. For the first time, Daniel no longer believed the bird was attacking them. Instead, he began to wonder if it was desperately asking for help. Daniel stood motionless for a few seconds, watching the bald eagle disappear toward the towering cliffs beyond Eagle Ridge. Most people would have driven away. Every instinct told him that following a wild eagle into the mountains made no sense. Yet Max had already started walking. The German shepherd wasn't rushing. He moved with calm confidence, occasionally stopping to glance back at Daniel before continuing forward. Daniel smiled. "You've convinced me before. I suppose one more time won't hurt." He locked the Ranger truck, slung his backpack over one shoulder, and checked his equipment. Radio, first aid kit, water, GPS, climbing rope, everything he might need for an unexpected patrol. "Let's go." Max immediately led the way. High above the treetops, the eagle circled once. Then it glided farther north. Every few hundred yards it landed briefly on a rock or dead tree, almost as though it wanted to make sure Daniel and Max were still following. The pattern repeated again and again. It never disappeared completely. It always waited. After nearly 40 minutes of hiking, the familiar ranger trail ended. Daniel frowned. This isn't part of any patrol route. Beyond the trail stretched untouched wilderness. Massive fallen pines from the previous night's storm blocked the easiest path. Fresh branches covered the forest floor. Small streams overflowed with rainwater. Max climbed over the fallen trees without hesitation. Daniel followed carefully. As they pushed deeper into the forest, the landscape grew steeper. The pine trees became taller. Large granite cliffs rose hundreds of feet above them. The eagle continued, leading them from one rocky outcrop to another. Daniel couldn't stop thinking about its behavior. If it wanted to defend its nest, why wasn't it chasing them away? Why did it keep waiting? Suddenly Max stopped. His ears lifted. His nose pointed toward a muddy section of ground. Daniel knelt beside him. Fresh tracks, large deer, elk, black bear, mountain lion. The storm had left the ground soft enough to preserve every footprint. But something else caught Daniel's attention. A long groove dragged across the mud, almost as if a massive tree branch had been pulled downhill. He followed the mark with his eyes. It disappeared toward the cliffs ahead. Interesting. Max sniffed the groove for only a moment before continuing forward. The eagle cried loudly overhead. Daniel looked up. The bird wasn't flying in circles anymore. It had become noticeably more restless. Its calls echoed across the valley, louder, more frequent, almost urgent. The terrain suddenly narrowed into a rocky canyon. Huge boulders lined both sides of the path. Daniel carefully checked the cliffs above. The storm had loosened several rocks. He knew they needed to move cautiously. As they entered the canyon, Max unexpectedly accelerated. His pace changed completely. The calm confidence from earlier was gone. Now he was moving with determination. Max the German shepherd ignored the command for the first time that day. He rounded a bend and disappeared behind a cluster of enormous boulders. Daniel hurried after him. When he reached the corner, he found Max standing perfectly still. The dog wasn't looking at the eagle. He was staring upward. Daniel slowly raised his eyes. Far above them, nearly 200 feet up the cliff face, sat a massive eagle's nest balanced between two rocky ledges. It was one of the largest nests Daniel had ever seen. "It has to be over 10 feet across," he whispered. The eagle landed beside it. But instead of settling down, it immediately took off again. It circled over Daniel and Max before flying back to the nest. Again and again. Then Daniel noticed something strange. The nest leaned sharply to one side. Several large pine branches were tangled across its edge. One enormous broken tree trunk rested against the rocky ledge. The previous night's storm had clearly caused significant damage. Daniel reached for his binoculars. He focused on the nest for several seconds. He saw nothing. Then, a tiny movement. Another. Something inside the nest was struggling. Daniel adjusted the focus. His heartbeat quickened. 2 young eaglets. They were alive, but neither one could stand. The fallen tree had partially crushed the nest. One eaglet flapped desperately but couldn't free itself. The adult eagle screamed again. Not at Daniel, not at Max. It was crying toward its chicks. Daniel slowly lowered the binoculars. Everything suddenly made sense. It wasn't attacking us. It was trying to find help. Max looked up at him. The German shepherd gave a quiet whine, as if he had understood the truth long before Daniel did. Daniel immediately grabbed his radio. "Headquarters, this is Ranger Brooks. I've located an active bald eagle nest. 2 eaglets appeared trapped after last night's storm. I need wildlife rescue assistance immediately." Static crackled for a moment. Then the dispatcher replied, "Copy that, Ranger Brooks. Hold your position. We're notifying the wildlife rescue team now." Daniel looked back toward the cliff. The mother eagle landed once more beside the damaged nest. She gently nudged one of her chicks with her beak. Then she looked down at Daniel. Not with fear, not with anger, but with unmistakable hope. Daniel kept his eyes on the nest high above the cliff. Through his binoculars, he could clearly see the 2 eaglets struggling beneath the heavy pine branch. Every time one of them tried to move, it became trapped again. The adult eagle circled overhead, crying repeatedly. This time, Daniel no longer heard anger in its voice. He heard desperation. Max stood quietly beside him, never taking his eyes off the nest. A minute later, Daniel's radio came to life. "Brooks, this is headquarters. We've contacted the Wildlife Rescue Unit." Daniel answered immediately. "How long?" There was a brief pause. "At least 90 minutes." Daniel frowned. The nearest rescue crew was responding from another district. 90 minutes felt far too long. He looked through the binoculars once more. One eaglet had stopped struggling. It lay almost motionless beneath the fallen branch. The second chick continued flapping weakly. Daniel lowered the binoculars. They don't have 90 minutes. He studied the cliff. The nest rested nearly 200 feet above the canyon floor. The rock face was steep but not completely vertical. Small ledges and scattered pine roots created a possible climbing route. Risky, but possible. Daniel unclipped the climbing rope from his backpack. Max immediately looked at him. "I know. I don't like this either." Just then another voice came over the radio. "Brooks, do not attempt the climb. Wait for the rescue team." Daniel remained silent. Then he looked at the nest again. The mother eagle landed beside her chicks and carefully tried to pull away the broken branch. It didn't move. She tried again. Still nothing. Finally, she stepped back, powerless. Daniel took a slow breath. "I can't just stand here." He secured the rope around the trunk of a sturdy pine tree growing near the base of the cliff. Then he tested every knot twice. Safety always came first. Max walked over and gently nudged Daniel's hand. Daniel smiled. "I'll be careful." He began climbing. The first 30 feet were manageable. Natural footholds gave him enough support. Above that, however, the cliff became much steeper. Loose rocks shifted beneath his boots. Small stones tumbled into the canyon below. Halfway up, Daniel paused on a narrow ledge to catch his breath. From there, he could finally see the nest more clearly. The fallen pine branch was thicker than he had expected. It stretched across almost half the nest. One eaglet was pinned beneath it. The second chick was trapped between broken branches. Neither could escape alone. The mother eagle landed nearby once again. Daniel froze. She was only 20 feet away. Instead of attacking, she watched him silently. Her wings remained folded. Her eyes never left his face. It was almost as though she understood why he had come. Slowly, she stepped backward onto another rock ledge. Giving him space, Daniel whispered, "I'll help them." The eagle remained still. Far below, Max barked once. Daniel looked down. The German shepherd wasn't watching him. He was staring toward the upper cliffs. His ears stood straight. Something had caught his attention. A second later, Daniel heard it too, a sharp, cracking sound. He turned toward the mountain. Another pine tree damaged during the storm was beginning to lean dangerously near the edge of the cliff. If it fell, it would crash directly onto the nest. Daniel looked back at the trapped eaglets, then at the unstable tree. Time had just become their greatest enemy. Daniel pressed himself against the cliff as another cracking sound echoed above him. The damaged pine tree swayed in the wind. A few broken branches tumbled down the mountainside, crashing against the rocks below. He looked toward the nest. The two eaglets were still trapped. If the tree fell completely, the nest would be destroyed. Daniel reached for his radio. "Headquarters, this is Brooks. The situation has changed. A second tree is becoming unstable above the nest." The dispatcher answered immediately. "The rescue helicopter has been delayed. Strong winds are preventing takeoff." Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. The eaglets couldn't wait. He clipped the radio back onto his belt and continued climbing. Every movement had to be slow and precise. Loose stones rolled beneath his boots. The higher he climbed, the stronger the wind became. Below, Max paced along the base of the cliff. His eyes never left Daniel. Suddenly, the German shepherd stopped. He lifted his nose into the air and sniffed several times. Then he ran toward the right side of the canyon. Daniel glanced down. Max. The dog disappeared behind a cluster of large boulders. For nearly a minute, Daniel couldn't see him. Then Max barked. Once, twice. The sound came from farther along the cliff. Daniel looked carefully in that direction. Hidden behind thick pine trees was a narrow ridge that curved around the mountain. He hadn't noticed it before. From where he stood, the ridge appeared to rise gradually toward the level of the nest. It wasn't a climbing route. It was a natural path. Daniel smiled. "Good boy." He carefully climbed back down to the canyon floor. As soon as he reached the bottom, Max was already waiting. The German shepherd wagged his tail once before turning toward the hidden ridge. "You found another way." Daniel followed. The trail was barely visible beneath fallen branches and wet moss. It wound between enormous boulders before climbing steadily through dense pine forest. Several times the path became so narrow that Daniel had to squeeze sideways between the rocks. After 20 minutes, the trees suddenly opened. Daniel stopped in surprise. The narrow ridge led to a broad rock ledge only 30 feet below the eagle's nest. He looked back toward the canyon. From there, the climb would have been almost impossible. Max had found a far safer route. Daniel gently scratched behind the dog's ears. "I never would have seen this trail." The mother eagle circled overhead once again. This time, she didn't cry out. She landed on a nearby rock, watching silently as Daniel approached. Only a short climb remained. Daniel secured his rope around a solid rock outcrop. Step by step, he climbed the final section. Now he could clearly see the nest. The broken pine branch had split the center of it. One eaglet struggled weakly beneath the heavy wood. The second chick stretched its neck toward its mother but couldn't move its wings. Daniel's heart tightened. They're still alive. He slowly reached the edge of the nest. The mother eagle watched from a nearby ledge. She never attacked. She simply waited. Daniel carefully examined the fallen branch. It was far too heavy to lift quickly. He would have to cut away the smaller limbs first, before moving the main section. He removed a compact folding saw from his backpack. Just as he reached toward the first branch, a loud crack echoed across the mountain. Daniel looked up. The damaged pine tree above the cliff had begun to fall. Its massive trunk was sliding directly toward the nest. The sound of splitting wood echoed across the mountainside. Daniel looked up just as the massive pine tree began sliding toward the cliff. "Move." He threw himself against the rock face. The enormous trunk crashed onto the ledge above the nest before stopping against another boulder. The entire cliff shook violently, sending branches and loose stones tumbling into the canyon. For several terrifying seconds, everything went silent. Daniel slowly looked toward the nest. It was still there. The fallen tree had stopped only a few feet away. He exhaled in relief. That was too close. The mother eagle circled once overhead before landing on a nearby rock again. She watched every movement Daniel made but never tried to attack. Below, Max barked sharply. Daniel glanced down. The German shepherd stood at the edge of the ridge, looking up with unwavering focus. "I'm okay," Daniel called. Max relaxed slightly but refused to take his eyes off the cliff. Daniel turned back to the nest. Time was running out. He carefully unfolded his compact rescue saw and began cutting away the smaller branches, pinning the eaglets in place. The first branch snapped free. One eaglet lifted its head and chirped weakly. "Easy, little one." Daniel gently moved the branch aside. The second eaglet remained trapped beneath the thicker section of the fallen pine. He tested its weight. Too heavy. There was no way to lift it safely with one hand. He unclipped a lightweight rescue strap from his backpack and looped it around the branch. Then he secured the other end to a solid rock behind him. Using the rope as a pulley, Daniel slowly shifted the branch upward, only a few inches. But it was enough. The trapped eaglet struggled forward and finally crawled free. Both chicks were alive, exhausted, but alive. The mother eagle gave a loud cry. This time, it sounded completely different. Not fear, not desperation. Relief. Daniel quickly examined the eaglets. Neither appeared seriously injured, though both were weak after hours beneath the fallen branches. He reached for his radio. "Headquarters, this is Brooks. I've freed both eaglets." A cheerful voice answered immediately. "Excellent work. The wildlife rescue team is 15 minutes away." Daniel smiled. "Copy. I'll keep them safe until they arrive." He carefully moved the broken branches away from the center of the nest, creating enough space for the chicks to rest. One eaglet slowly shuffled toward its mother. She lowered her head and gently touched its beak. Daniel quietly stepped backward. The reunion lasted only a few seconds. Then another sound echoed across the ridge. A deep rumble. Daniel froze. The unstable ground beneath the nest had begun to shift. A long crack spread across the rocky ledge. Small stones rolled into the canyon. The storm had weakened more than just the trees. The entire ledge was becoming unstable. Daniel immediately understood the danger. If the rock collapsed before the rescue team arrived, the nest could fall with it. He looked toward the frightened eaglets, then at the mother eagle. He had saved them from the branches. Now he had to save them from the mountain itself. Daniel stared at the widening crack beneath the eagle's nest. Small stones continued rolling over the edge, disappearing into the canyon below. This wasn't just a damaged nest anymore. The entire ledge was becoming unstable. He pressed the emergency button on his radio. "Headquarters, this is Brooks. The cliff is beginning to collapse." A moment later, Chief Ranger Susan Mitchell answered, "Daniel, the wildlife rescue team is 5 minutes away. Do not take unnecessary risks." Daniel looked at the two exhausted eaglets. If the ledge failed before help arrived, they wouldn't survive another fall. "I don't think we have 5 minutes." He clipped the radio back onto his belt. The mother eagle remained only a few yards away. She watched him closely, but made no attempt to attack. It was as if she understood he was trying to protect her family. Daniel carefully removed his rescue blanket from his backpack and spread it beside the nest. One at a time, he gently lifted the eaglets onto the soft fabric. Both birds chirped nervously, but neither struggled. "Easy, you're safe." He wrapped the blanket loosely around them to prevent them from slipping. Just as he tightened the final strap, crack, the rock beneath the nest shifted several inches. Daniel lost his balance and dropped to one knee. Dust filled the air. Below, Max barked repeatedly. The German shepherd was running back and forth along the ridge, searching for another way up. Then he stopped. His ears stood straight. He looked toward a narrow opening between two massive boulders and barked again. Daniel followed Max's gaze. Hidden behind the rocks was a wider ledge that connected to safer ground only a short distance away. "If I can reach that ledge." He carefully lifted the bundled eaglets against his chest. Every step had to be slow. The rock continued to groan beneath his boots. 10 feet, 8 feet, 5 feet. The crack spread farther behind him. Pieces of stone broke away and crashed into the canyon. The mother eagle flew overhead, circling above Daniel as if urging him onward. Only a few more steps remain. Max stood at the edge of the safe ledge, barking encouragement. Daniel reached forward, his boots slipped. For one terrifying moment he felt himself falling. He caught the rope with one hand while holding the eaglets tightly against his chest with the other. The safety line stopped him just inches from the edge. Daniel pulled himself back onto solid ground. At that exact moment, a deafening roar echoed through the canyon. The unstable section of cliff finally collapsed. The old nest disappeared beneath falling rocks and broken trees. A cloud of dust rose into the sky. Daniel sat silently, breathing hard. If he had waited even another minute, the eaglets would have been lost. A rescue helicopter appeared above the canyon just as the dust began to settle. Minutes later, wildlife biologists reached Daniel and carefully examined the two young eagles. "They're dehydrated," one veterinarian said. "But they're going to survive." Daniel smiled with relief. Beside him, Max finally relaxed, gently wagging his tail as the mother eagle landed on a nearby pine tree. For the first time since the morning began, the great bird folded her wings peacefully. The danger wasn't over yet, but her family was finally safe. The rescue helicopter hovered steadily above the canyon as the wildlife team secured a safe landing on a nearby clearing. Within minutes, two wildlife biologists and a veterinarian climbed the ridge carrying specialized equipment for birds of prey. Daniel carefully handed them the two eaglets. The veterinarian completed a quick examination before smiling. "They're exhausted and dehydrated, but neither has broken bones. They should recover completely." Daniel finally released the breath he had been holding. "That's the best news I've heard all day." Nearby, Max sat quietly beside him, watching every movement. The mother eagle remained perched high in a pine tree overlooking the rescue operation. She never flew away. She simply observed. One of the biologists looked toward her. "I've worked with bald eagles for 15 years. I've never seen one behave like this." Daniel nodded. "She wasn't trying to scare us. She was asking for help." The biologist smiled. "And somehow, your dog understood before any of us did." Daniel looked down at Max. The German shepherd simply wagged his tail. For him, following the eagle had seemed like the obvious thing to do. The damaged nest, however, could no longer be used. Half of the rocky ledge had collapsed into the canyon. The rescue team gathered to discuss their options. "We can't return the chicks there," the veterinarian explained. "The next storm would destroy anything rebuilt on that ledge." Another ranger pointed toward a large pine tree growing on a nearby cliff. "There. It's high enough to protect them, and much more stable." Within an hour, the team carefully installed a specially designed artificial nesting platform among the strongest branches of the old pine. It closely resembled a natural eagle's nest. Fresh branches, pine needles, and soft grasses were arranged inside. Once everything was ready, the veterinarian gently placed the two eaglets into their new home. For a moment, nothing happened. The mother eagle remained on her perch. Daniel quietly stepped back with Max. The entire rescue team stayed perfectly still. Then the eagle spread her wings. She soared across the valley in one graceful circle before descending toward the new nest. Everyone held their breath. She landed beside her chicks. The eaglets immediately lifted their heads and chirped excitedly. The eagle gently touched each one with her beak before spreading her wings over them. The veterinarian smiled. She accepts the new nest. A wave of relief swept through the entire team. One ranger quietly applauded. Soon everyone joined in, not for themselves, but for the little family that had survived against impossible odds. As the helicopter prepared to leave, Daniel stood beside Max, overlooking the valley. The golden afternoon sunlight stretched across the mountains. "It all started because she scratched our truck," Daniel said softly. Max looked toward the new nest. The mother eagle was calmly feeding one of her chicks. Daniel smiled. "You knew she wasn't our enemy." Max leaned gently against Daniel's leg. High above them, the eagle suddenly lifted into the air once more. She flew directly over Daniel and Max. Instead of crying loudly as she had that morning, she glided silently in a slow circle above their heads. Then for just a brief moment, she dipped one wing toward them before returning to her nest. No one could say for certain what the gesture meant, but everyone standing there felt the same thing. It looked remarkably like gratitude. The rescue operation officially ended just before sunset. The helicopter lifted off from the clearing, carrying away the damaged equipment from the collapsed nest, while the wildlife biologists remained behind to observe the young eaglets in their new home. From a distance, everything appeared peaceful once again. The mother eagle stood proudly beside her chicks, occasionally spreading her wings to shield them from the cool mountain wind. Daniel leaned against the hood of his Ranger truck. "I think they'll be all right now." Max sat beside him, watching the cliff in silence. Normally, that would have been the end of the story, but Max suddenly stood up. His ears pointed toward the forest behind the cliff. Then he started walking. Daniel laughed softly. "I should have guessed. You're not finished yet." The German shepherd followed a faint game trail that disappeared between towering pine trees. Daniel grabbed his backpack and followed. After nearly 15 minutes, Max stopped beside the fallen pine tree that had nearly destroyed the nest. Its enormous trunk stretched across the mountainside. Daniel examined it closely. Something caught his attention. The trunk hadn't broken naturally. Near its base were deep claw marks and several fresh cuts where lightning had split the wood during the previous night's storm. The fallen tree had slid almost 50 yards before crashing against the eagle's nest. "If it had fallen a few feet farther," Daniel whispered, "the entire family would have been buried." He photographed the damaged tree for the park's storm report. As he put away his camera, one of the wildlife biologists approached. "I've been reviewing our monitoring records." Daniel looked up. "What did you find?" The biologist smiled. "That eagle has nested in this area for nearly 12 years. Daniel looked back toward the distant cliff. 12 years, she nodded. Every spring. The same pair has returned to raise their chicks. She paused before continuing. "But we've never recorded behavior like today's." Daniel smiled. "I don't think any of us have." The biologist glanced toward Max. "Animals communicate differently than we do. Sometimes another animal understands those signals better than people ever could." Daniel scratched behind Max's ears. "I believe that." As they returned to the overlook, several photographers from Yellowstone's wildlife monitoring program had arrived. They quietly captured images of the eagle family from a safe distance using powerful telephoto lenses. No one approached the nest. No one disturbed the birds. The rescue had one final purpose: protecting their future. Just before leaving, the lead biologist placed a temporary safety boundary around the entire nesting area. This section of the park will remain closed until the chicks are old enough to fly. Daniel agreed immediately. Some places were more valuable, left undisturbed. As the last rays of sunlight illuminated the mountains, the mother eagle suddenly took flight again. She soared high above the valley before gliding directly over Daniel and Max. This time she didn't stop. She continued toward the new nest where the two eaglets waited safely beneath the evening sky. Daniel watched until she disappeared against the orange horizon. Then he looked at Max. "This morning I thought she was trying to drive us away." He smiled. "But you understood the truth before I did." Max wagged his tail gently. For him there had never been a mystery. Only a mother desperately trying to save her family. As Daniel and Max began the hike back toward their truck, the forest grew quiet once more. The storm had passed. The rescue was complete. But neither of them realized that the story of the remarkable eagle would soon spread far beyond Yellowstone, inspiring thousands of people who would hear how one wild bird, one ranger, and one loyal German shepherd had trusted one another when words were impossible. 3 weeks passed after the rescue. Summer had fully arrived in Yellowstone National Park, and the forests were once again filled with visitors from around the world. Daniel, Brooks, and Max had returned to their normal patrol routine. They checked hiking trails, assisted lost tourists, and monitored wildlife throughout the park. Life seemed to have returned to normal. But one morning, Daniel was called to the visitor center by Chief Ranger Susan Mitchell. When he arrived with Max, he immediately noticed several television cameras parked outside the building. "What happened?" Daniel asked. Susan smiled. "Word about the eagle rescue spread much faster than we expected." Inside the visitor center, wildlife photographers, journalists, and conservation volunteers had gathered for a small presentation about protecting Yellowstone's birds of prey. Large photographs from the rescue mission were displayed across the room. One showed the damaged nest after the storm. Another captured the rescue team building the new nesting platform. The largest photograph hung in the center of the exhibit. It showed Max standing quietly beneath the cliff, looking up at the mother eagle while the morning sun shone through the pine trees. Visitors stopped in front of that photograph longer than any other. A young boy tugged gently on his father's sleeve. "Dad, is that the dog who understood the eagle?" His father smiled. "Yes." If he hadn't trusted his instincts, the babies might not have survived. Daniel overheard the conversation and quietly smiled. Max simply sat beside him, completely unaware that he had become the center of the exhibition. Later that afternoon, one of Yellowstone's senior wildlife biologists approached Daniel carrying a tablet. "I'd like to show you something." She opened several recent photographs captured by remote monitoring cameras near the new nest. The two eaglets were growing quickly. Their feathers had become darker. They were standing confidently near the edge of the nest, stretching their wings in preparation for their first flights. "Their recovery has been remarkable," the biologist said, "and the mother has remained with them every day." Daniel felt genuine relief. "They've got another chance." The biologist nodded. "Because someone listened." Daniel looked toward Max. "No, because someone else listened first." The biologist laughed softly. "I suppose you're right." That evening, Daniel and Max drove back to Eagle Ridge for one final inspection before sunset. The safety boundary remained in place, keeping visitors well away from the nesting area. Daniel used his binoculars. The two young eagles stood side by side, flapping their wings against the evening breeze. Nearby, their mother watched calmly from the highest branch of an old pine tree. Everything looked exactly as it should. Daniel lowered the binoculars. This is how it was always supposed to end. Just then, one of the eaglets made a bold attempt. It jumped from the edge of the nest. For a brief second, it dropped toward the valley. Then its wings caught the wind. The young eagle glided awkwardly through the air before landing safely on a nearby branch. Daniel couldn't help smiling. "You did it." The second eaglet chirped excitedly from the nest, while the mother eagle flew down beside the young bird. Max wagged his tail as though celebrating the moment too. The little family was complete once again. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, the three eagles soared together above the valley for the first time since the storm. Daniel watched until they became tiny silhouettes against the orange sky. He placed a hand gently on Max's neck. "You trusted her when I couldn't." Max looked up with calm, intelligent eyes. For him, there had never been a mystery. He had simply recognized another parent trying to protect its young. Daniel smiled. "Come on, partner. There are still plenty of lives out here that might need us tomorrow." Together, the ranger and his faithful German shepherd walked back toward their truck beneath the glowing Yellowstone sunset, unaware that their greatest lesson had never been about rescuing wildlife. It had been about learning to see beyond fear and listening when nature quietly asks for help. Autumn arrived quietly in Yellowstone National Park. The pine forests had turned shades of gold and crimson while cool mountain winds swept across the valleys each morning. Nearly 3 months had passed since the day Daniel Brooks and Max followed a bald eagle into the wilderness. Life had returned to its familiar rhythm. Visitors filled the hiking trails. Wildlife photographers searched patiently for bears, wolves, and elk. Daniel and Max continued their daily patrols just as they always had. One peaceful afternoon, Daniel decided to revisit Eagle Ridge. Not because there was another emergency. He simply wanted to see how the eagle family was doing. As they reached the overlook, Daniel raised his binoculars toward the new nesting platform. The old nest was gone forever. Only scattered rocks remained where the cliff had collapsed. But a few hundred yards away, high in the sturdy pine chosen by the rescue team, stood the new home. It was full of life. The two eaglets were no longer helpless chicks. They had grown into strong, young, bald eagles, their wings nearly as wide as their mother's. One after another, they launched from the nest, circling confidently above the valley before returning to their perch. Daniel lowered the binoculars with a smile. They made it. Max stood quietly beside him, watching the birds glide effortlessly through the clear blue sky. Just then, the mother eagle lifted from the highest branch. She soared gracefully toward the overlook. Daniel remained perfectly still. The eagle flew directly above him and Max. For a brief moment, she circled once over their heads. The sunlight illuminated her white head and broad wings as she rode the mountain breeze. Then she gave one clear, powerful call, not the desperate cry that had echoed across the canyon months before. This one sounded calm, confident, peaceful. Without another circle, she turned and flew back toward her family. Daniel watched until she disappeared beyond the trees. He smiled quietly. I'd like to think that was her way of saying thank you. Max wagged his tail as though he agreed. Daniel knelt beside his loyal companion and gently scratched behind his ears. You were right from the very beginning. I saw danger. You saw a mother asking for help. The German shepherd leaned gently against Daniel's shoulder. For Max, nothing extraordinary had happened. He had simply trusted his instincts. As the sun slowly disappeared behind Yellowstone's mountains, Daniel and Max began walking back toward their ranger truck. Neither of them expected medals. Neither of them sought recognition. The greatest reward had already been given. A family had been reunited. 2 young eagles had been given a second chance to fly, and one frightened mother had learned that not every human was a threat. Before climbing into the truck, Daniel looked back one last time. High above the valley, 3 bald eagles soared together beneath the golden evening sky. Free, safe, exactly where they belonged. Daniel smiled. Come on, partner. Tomorrow will bring another adventure. Max barked once, and together they drove slowly down the mountain road as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the endless forests of Yellowstone. Some heroes save lives with great strength. Others save them simply by listening. Sometimes, the quietest cry for help comes from the wild itself. And sometimes, all it takes is one loyal dog willing to understand it.